Long before the stars were mapped, and long before the great empires of the galaxy rose to power, there were stories told in quiet corners of the universe. These stories spoke of a species not yet known, a species that would rise from the dust of a small world and one day shake the pillars of the stars themselves. The stories were called prophecies, ancient warnings written on stone tablets buried inside forgotten temples and saved in broken fragments of digital code older than most star systems. Many believed they were myths, old legends created by fearful ancestors who looked into the night sky and imagined monsters waiting to be born. But every prophecy, no matter the origin, carried one single word repeated again and again: humans. The word echoed across time in a language that many scholars struggled to translate, but its meaning was always the same. A people would come from a small blue world. They would be fragile at first, yet unstoppable when united. They would burn brighter than fire and cut deeper than steel, and in their rise many other civilizations would fall. In the heart of the galaxy, inside the Great Hall of the Stellar Council, the prophecies were once brought forward for study. Ancient scholars read the words carefully, presenting their findings to the leaders of dozens of advanced species. The council chamber was filled with the glow of holograms showing the scattered records. The prophecy speaks of them as destroyers. One old scholar whispered with a trembling voice. It warns that this species will bring violent change to all who ignore them. The words floated in the chamber, heavy with meaning, but instead of fear, laughter filled the air. Alien leaders chuckled in their own strange ways. Some clicked their mandibles together, some hissed like steam, some echoed booming laughter that shook the walls. The idea seemed ridiculous to them. How could a species from a forgotten world, a world not even marked on their maps, become something greater than the proud empires that had ruled the stars for millennia? Nonsense! One council member barked, his voice sharp. If such a species existed, they would already be known. There is no threat from a planet of dirt and water. Others nodded in agreement, and the ancient warnings were pushed aside, thrown into the archives where old myths went to die. Yet not all dismissed the prophecy so easily. A few younger scholars sat silently, their eyes fixed on the repeating word, humans. They noticed how the name appeared in different languages, carved by different hands, yet always written with the same sense of urgency. They wondered if, perhaps, the warnings were more than old stories. But their voices were small and weak, drowned out by the roaring laughter of leaders who saw no danger in the shadows. The council believed in power. They believed in fleets of warships and weapons that could tear moons apart. They had ruled unchallenged for thousands of years. To them, the idea that a fragile, unknown species could rise and threaten them was nothing more than a joke. And so the warnings were sealed away, their importance forgotten, their truth ignored. Far away on the edge of a quiet spiral arm of the galaxy, a small planet spun around a yellow sun. It was a planet of oceans and mountains, storms and deserts. On that world, a new species was taking its first steps toward the stars. They built cities, they forged weapons, they discovered fire electricity machines, and finally, the ability to break, free of gravity itself. The name of that world was Earth, and the name of that species was exactly what the prophecy had spoken of: humans. While the galaxy laughed and turned away, humanity began to write its own story. At first, their reach was small, only touching the moon that circled their home and the red dust of Mars. But even in their earliest struggles, one truth was clear. Humans did not give up. They fought through hunger, through war, through storms and silence. They stumbled, but always rose again. Every failure became a lesson, every wound became a scar, and every scar became strength. They were not yet ready to challenge the stars, but the spark had been lit. Back in the archives of the Stellar Council, the records gathered dust. Old guardians who kept the halls of memory sometimes passed by the sealed data crystals and broken relics that carried the warnings. Few cared to read them anymore. But those who did could not shake the feeling that something was waiting. One archivist whispered to another that the signs were aligning. The galaxy was entering an age of unrest. Old empires were weakening, new powers were rising, and in the middle of the chaos, the humans were beginning to shine. The archivist's voice trembled as he remembered the final line of the prophecy. From fire they will rise, and when they rise, they will never fall again. His companion laughed, shaking his head at the foolishness of old words. Superstition, he said. Only the desperate believe in such things. But somewhere deep inside, the archivist felt a cold chill. He could not explain why, but he believed the warnings were real. He believed the laughter of the council was a mistake that would cost them dearly. Meanwhile, on Earth, humans looked up at the stars with eyes filled with wonder. They did not know that their name was already written in alien histories. They did not know that empires far older than their own had already spoken of them in whispers and warnings. To humans, the stars were empty, waiting to be explored. To the galaxy, the humans were invisible, too small to matter. But time was moving forward, and the path of the prophecy was unfolding step by step. The first rockets cracked the sky. The first signals carried human voices into the dark. The first machines touched the soil of other worlds. And with each small step, the prophecy stirred like a sleeping beast ready to wake. The warnings had been given, but the galaxy had laughed. They believed in their power, in their pride, in their control over the stars. They did not see the storm rising from a small blue world at the edge of their maps. They did not see that the fragile species they mocked would one day stand before them not as children, but as rivals. The forgotten warnings waited in silence while humanity marched forward toward destiny. The Stellar Council was the heart of galactic power, a grand chamber where leaders of dozens of advanced species gathered under shining pillars of light. The hall was wide and endless, filled with holographic stars spinning above them and banners of every empire flowing like rivers of color. It was here that laws were made, wars were decided, and fates of entire worlds were sealed. In this place, no voice was greater than the council's. And when the warnings of the old prophecies were brought again before them, the leaders reacted not with caution, but with laughter. A thin scholar with trembling hands held the ancient records. High. His voice echoed through the chamber as he read the words that had been preserved for thousands of years. The humans will rise from a world of water and stone. They will build from fire and steel. They will challenge the stars, and none shall remain unchanged. His eyes darted nervously from one towering figure to another, but the faces staring back at him were filled not with fear, but amusement. A council member from the Atheron Empire leaned forward, his scaled mouth curling into a grin. "Humans," he hissed. "A myth. Nothing more than a bedtime story told by primitives afraid of the night sky." His voice carried across the hall. As others chuckled, their throats rumbling with amusement. Another leader clicked his sharp mandibles together, producing a harsh, chittering laugh. Even if such a species exists, they will break themselves before reaching the stars. The galaxy is harsh. Weak creatures do not survive long. The scholar tried again, his hands shaking as he displayed the holographic fragments of stone tablets etched with strange markings. But the name repeats again and again across different worlds, across forgotten ruins. The warnings are clear. If we ignore them... His words were cut off by a booming laugh that echoed across the chamber. It came from Lord Sarath of the Varkon Dominion, a towering figure armored in bone and metal. "You dare waste our time with ghost stories? The Council does not fear shadows from the past. We rule the stars. No species from some backwater planet could ever threaten us." His words were met with a wave of agreement. Dozens of counselors raised their voices, mocking the prophecy with jokes and insults. Some even suggested burning the records to end the distraction once and for all. For them, It was entertainment, nothing more. Yet in the corner of the chamber, a few younger council members remained quiet. They watched as the laughter spread across the hall, and they exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a slender figure from the Solari Republic, whispered softly to her neighbor, "The name appears in our oldest archives, too. My ancestors wrote of them in fear. What if this is not a story?" But her words were drowned out by the roar of the others who clapped their claws and struck their staffs against the ground in mock applause. The council had made its decision. They would not take the prophecy seriously. The warnings would be locked away once more, buried under layers of bureaucracy. The galaxy would turn its eyes away from the humans who at that moment were taking their first steps into space. After the meeting, the scholar who had spoken stood outside the hall, his head lowered, his hands clutching the old records close to his chest. He knew the council had mocked him, but the fear in his heart remained. He had studied the prophecies his entire life, and he had seen how accurate they were in describing events that had already come to pass. The rise and fall of empires, the discovery of great weapons, even the collapse of stars had been written in the same style and had proven true. Why then would the prophecy of humans be false? He whispered to himself the words etched on the ancient stone. From fire they will rise, from steel they will march, and from the stars they will never retreat. He felt a chill run down his spine, but when he looked around, all he saw were alien officials laughing, still sharing jokes about the foolish myth of humans. Back inside the chamber, the council turned its attention back to politics. They spoke of trade routes, wars against rebellious systems, and new mining colonies. The warnings of humans faded into background noise like a dream half remembered. But the galaxy outside did not care for their laughter. Events were already moving forward. In the darkness of the void, radio waves traveled carrying human voices into space. In those signals were songs of hope, words of war, and the sound of ambition. None of the council members paid attention to the faint noise. To them, it was static, meaningless chatter from a small, forgotten world. Yet, if they had listened carefully, they might have felt a spark of something strange in those signals, a determination that could not be erased. Weeks later, as the scholar walked the archives of the council, he found himself staring at the sealed doors behind which the old prophecies were kept. Dust clung to the corners, and guards stood lazily at their posts, uninterested in the forgotten words of ancient times. He wanted to scream at them to open the doors to read the warnings again, but he knew it was useless. No one would listen. The council was blinded by its own pride. They believed that power belonged only to those who already held it. They could not imagine that the universe might be preparing a new challenger. The scholar closed his eyes and whispered again the final line of the prophecy. "They will come when the stars are not watching. They will arrive when laughter fills the halls. And when they stand before us, the galaxy will remember their name." While the stellar council filled its chamber with arrogance and mockery, far away humans worked tirelessly on their world. They argued, they fought, they stumbled, but they built and built again. Their rockets roared into the sky, their machines clawed at new frontiers, and their dreams stretched further than their arms could reach. They were small, fragile, and unprepared for the dangers of the galaxy, but unlike the great empires they had, something powerful within them, a hunger, a refusal to stop. The council did not see it yet, but the prophecy was unfolding word by word, and every laugh that echoed in the chamber of stars would one day turn into silence. For now, the galaxy laughed at the warnings of humans, but destiny was already on its way, and reality could not be mocked forever. Across the galaxy, the council's laughter still echoed, but in the quiet of deep space, something had begun to change. Far beyond the reach of the great empires, a faint signal slipped across the void, traveling light year after light year until it brushed against the listening ears of machines left to drift in silence. These machines belonged to small research outposts, stations, forgotten by most, yet still performing their endless duty of scanning the dark. At first, the watchers thought the sound was static, a meaningless hum of the universe, but as they listened closer, they realized it was more. It was rhythm, it was voice, it was music. A human broadcast, simple and clumsy, yet filled with a strange energy that no alien mind could quite explain. The signals carried laughter songs, cries of war and whispers of love, all tumbling through the endless dark as if humanity had decided to shout its existence to the stars. On distant stations, young alien scientists leaned forward with wide eyes, listening again and again. They heard words they could not translate, yet the emotion inside the voices was undeniable. It was ambition, it was passion, it was life itself. Some grew uneasy, whispering to one another that the old prophecy might not be a story after all. But when their reports reached the council chambers, the leaders brushed them aside with amusement. "Static," one lord said, "a primitive race screaming into the dark. They will vanish before they are ever seen." And once again the sound of laughter drowned the warnings. But the signals did not stop. They grew stronger, clearer each year. As humanity built larger towers, more powerful transmitters, and spread their voice further into the void. Even when the messages were unintentional, when they were simply the noise of television broadcasts or military codes, the waves rushed outward endlessly. The galaxy did not know it, but Earth had already declared its presence. For the first time, alien ears had heard the human spirit carried on invisible waves of light. Among the young scholars and scientists, small debates began to stir. "They are loud," one said softly. "Too loud. A species that shouts so boldly cannot be ignored." Another nodded nervously, remembering the prophecy's words. "From the dust of their world they will cry out, and the stars will hear them." But when these whispers reached the ears of the ruling empires, they were mocked once again. The council's halls shook with laughter as elders boasted of their own power. To them, humanity was nothing but a noise in the wind, soon to fade. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity took its first steps beyond its own sky. Rockets pierced the atmosphere, leaving trails of fire as they carried fragile humans into orbit. The first spacecraft were clumsy, their metal frames rattling against the void. Yet they flew. Humans planted their flag on the gray dust of their moon, their footprints pressed into the surface where no wind could erase them. The galaxy did not watch. The galaxy did not care. But if they had looked closer, they would have seen what the prophecy had meant when it said the species would rise from fire. For every launch, every broken ship, every failure, humanity returned stronger. They learned from mistakes, they repaired what was shattered, and they tried again. No other empire had risen with such stubbornness, for most advanced species had been. Guided carefully by elders or by long traditions, but humanity was reckless, raw, and unyielding. Every obstacle that blocked their way became fuel for greater ambition. Somewhere deep in the archives of the Stellar Council, one old archivist finally noticed the increasing reports from border stations. His thin hands brushed over glowing screens, showing the repeating signals from Earth. At first, he thought it was meaningless chatter, but when he played the sounds aloud, he felt something strange in his chest. It was the sound of laughter, and yet it was not mocking laughter like that of the council. It was joy, pure and wild. He closed his eyes and shivered. For the first time, he truly wondered if the galaxy was making a terrible mistake. He whispered, to himself, remembering the prophecy he had read so many times. Their voices will reach the stars before their ships. Their dreams will fly before their bodies. And when they arrive, the stars will already know their name. He tried to bring this concern forward, but the guards laughed in his face, telling him to leave the council in peace. The archivist lowered his head in shame, but deep in his heart the fear grew stronger. Back on Earth, humans did not know they were being heard. To them, the stars were still silent, unknowable places waiting for explorers. They launched satellites, To orbit their world, they built telescopes that reached further than ever before, and they sent probes into the black, carrying golden records etched with the sounds of their world. These records carried greetings in many languages, drawings of human form, even directions back to their small blue planet. It was an open invitation, one the galaxy ignored with arrogance. For those who mocked the prophecy, these actions were proof of foolishness, not strength. They called humans reckless for throwing their secrets into the void. But they did not understand the truth behind the signals. Humans were not only reaching outward, they were declaring who they were. They were saying, "We are here, we are alive, and we will not be silent." The first signs were clear to any who dared to look. A new species was awakening. They were not born in the core worlds where ancient empires stood tall, but on the very edge of the galaxy where no one expected power to rise. And yet power was rising. Humanity's technology was still young. Their ships still slow, their weapons still weak compared to galactic standards. But their pace was terrifying. What took other species centuries, humanity achieved in decades. Every generation grew more daring, more ambitious. The stars that seemed distant and unreachable now burned as goals within their grasp. And though the council still mocked, though the empires still laughed in comfort, the shadows of fear began to creep into their hearts. Because deep inside, they all knew one truth they refused to say aloud. The first signs of the prophecy had arrived. The humans had been named. The humans had spoken. And the stars had listened. Humanity's steps into the stars were not graceful. They were clumsy and filled with pain, but every failure only forged them stronger. The first rockets shook and fell. The first machines exploded in fire, and the first explorers sometimes never returned. But humans did not stop. They were creatures born from struggle. Creatures that had fought through storms and hunger wars and plagues, yet had always risen again. When their ships broke, they built new ones. When their colonies struggled, they adapted. And when the void of space seemed too hostile, they made it their home. It was during these early years that the prophecy's words began to take form. From fire they will rise, and from steel they will march. Across Earth and its colonies, sparks of fire lit the skies as machines roared upward, leaving trails of smoke behind them. Factories filled with the thunder of steel bending to human will. What other species had taken centuries to achieve, humanity was building in decades. They learned to live on the cold surface of the moon. They carved shelters into the red dust of Mars, and they dreamed of worlds far beyond their own. For them, nothing was impossible, only delayed. The galaxy still watched with mockery, though in secret some began to feel unease. Alien scouts, disguised as traders, slipped into human systems pretending to offer goods while quietly recording every detail they saw. They reported back to their masters that the humans were still primitive compared to the grand empires, their ships slow, their weapons crude, their colonies fragile. But they also reported something else. The humans adapted at terrifying speed. Every challenge they faced became a lesson, and no lesson was forgotten. If their ship engines failed, they built better engines. If disease spread on a colony, they found cures. If their weapons could not reach the stars, they invented ones that could. No other race they had seen carried such reckless determination. The Council, however, dismissed these reports, just as they had dismissed the old warnings. "Children playing in fire," one elder said with a sneer. "They will burn themselves. Long before they burn us?" His words were met with laughter, but deep inside, even he felt a shadow of doubt. On Earth, the age of steel was everywhere. Towering cities reached higher than clouds, glowing with lights that cut through the night. Massive machines crawled across deserts and oceans, carrying materials to feed the hunger of industry. Human scientists worked without rest, discovering new ways to push the limits of nature. Nuclear fire had already reshaped their world, and though it terrified them, it also drove them to harness greater power. From this fire, they built new ships stronger and faster than the ones before. Colonists marched outward, riding vessels of steel into the void, each one carrying hope and fear, but never surrender. On Mars, great domes rose from the dust, glowing, like lanterns in the darkness. On moons of Jupiter, mines drilled deep into ice and stone, bringing back treasures to fuel humanity's rise. Even in failure, their will did not break. Explosions took lives, accidents stole entire colonies, but the humans buried their dead and marched onward. Each sacrifice became part of their story, part of their steel. For the Stellar Council, the reports kept coming in, but still they mocked. They watched humans expand and called it desperation. They saw their colonies and called them fragile. They saw their weapons and called them toys. Yet, in quiet moments, when the laughter had faded, some council members wondered how long the humans could be ignored. For every year that passed, humanity grew stronger and their reach longer. They were not yet a great power, but their path was clear. The archivist who had once whispered of the prophecy returned to his records each night, reading the words again and again. He knew what he was watching. He knew the fire and steel were not the end, but only the beginning. He tried once, more to warn the council, but they silenced him with cruel smiles. "You see fire," they told him. "We see smoke that will fade with the wind." The archivist turned away with sorrow, for he knew smoke was only the shadow of something greater to come. Among the humans themselves, there was no prophecy guiding them, no ancient words pushing them forward. They did not know the galaxy watched. With arrogance, they did not know their name had been written in alien fears. They only knew that the stars were there and they would reach them. The age of fire and steel was not born of destiny, but of hunger. A hunger that no wall could contain. They dreamed of skies beyond their own, of lands untouched, and of freedom that no empire could steal. This hunger became their fuel, stronger than any weapon and sharper than any blade. While other races grew comfortable in their power, humans grew restless in their weakness. That restlessness carried them higher, faster, further. One night, as a new rocket stood ready on its launch pad, a human engineer stared at it with tired eyes. He whispered words no alien could hear. "We will not stop. Not now, not ever." The engines roared to life, fire consumed the sky, and the rocket rose upward, carrying more than metal. It carried the weight of a prophecy humans did not know they were fulfilling. From fire they had risen, from steel they marched, and nothing in. The galaxy could halt the tide already moving. The laughter of the council still echoed across its great chamber, but somewhere deep in the hearts of those who listened closely, the sound of unease had begun to grow. They had dismissed the warnings. They had mocked the signs, but the age of fire and steel had arrived, and with it the first true step toward the storm that would one day change the galaxy forever. The galaxy had always believed that first contact would be theirs to control, that when new species were discovered, the great empires would arrive with fleets and banners claiming them as subjects before they could rise. But when the first alien ship crossed paths with humanity, nothing went as expected. It began with a small scouting vessel from the Zorath Union sent to the outer edges of their territory to investigate the strange signals that had been reaching them for decades. The crew expected to find a primitive species bound to its home. World perhaps just beginning to build satellites, nothing more, but when their sensors locked onto the Sol system, they were shocked. Not only had humans broken free of their planet, they had already built colonies across their moon and Mars. Their ships, though, crewed, moved with determination across the void, and their voices carried endlessly through space. The Zorath captain sneered at the sight of them, expecting fear when he finally revealed himself. But when the humans noticed his ship, something unexpected happened. They did not run. They did not hide. Instead, they sent out a signal filled with greetings and hope. Their words, though untranslatable, carried a tone of curiosity and boldness that unsettled the Zorath crew. These were not frightened children begging for mercy. These were explorers looking outward with hungry eyes. The first meeting was clumsy. The Zorath ship hovered near a human station orbiting Mars. Humans rushed to communicate flashing lights, sending radio signals, even attempting to paint symbols across the side of their station. The Zorath captain laughed at their desperation, mocking them for their weakness. "They are foolish," he told his crew. "They do not even understand who stands before them. They think us equals." Yet deep inside, he felt a strange discomfort. There was no fear in the human eyes staring at him from the windows of their fragile station. Instead, there was something else, something dangerous. Ambition. The humans were not begging for survival, they were reaching for connection and perhaps even challenge. When the first cautious exchange of symbols was made, the Zorath crew returned home with their reports. They expected the council to dismiss the humans, and they were correct. The council roared with laughter once more, mocking the clumsy species, who dared to wave at the stars. "Children playing with fire," one counselor said. "They will burn themselves long before they burn us." The hall filled with jeers and jokes, but among the laughter, a few voices whispered warnings. The sea. Prophecy is unfolding. The humans did not bow. They welcomed the unknown. On Earth, the story of the strange encounter spread like wildfire. Governments tried to contain it, but soon whispers of alien life flooded every corner of human society. People looked at the night sky with new eyes filled with awe and questions. Humanity's leaders argued among themselves, some fearful of inviting danger, others eager to reach further than ever before, but one thing united them all: the knowledge that they were not alone and that the future would no longer be bound to one planet. Scientists worked with renewed fury, engineers pushed harder than ever, and dreamers whispered that the stars now belonged to them as much as anyone. Humanity had tasted contact, and they would never stop reaching for more. The Zorath Union tried to downplay the meeting, telling the council that humans were weak, harmless, and barely worth noting. They described their crude technology, their fragile colonies, and their small fleets, but despite their words, the unease in their voices betrayed them. The council mocked them for even wasting time reporting such details. "Do you fear children?" one elder growled. "Do you tremble at the sight of fragile bones and soft flesh?" The laughter returned, but in the shadows of the chamber, the archivist listened closely, his heart pounding with dread. He remembered the exact line from the prophecy. "When they meet the stars, they will not kneel. They will stand as equals." And now it had come true. The humans had not kneeled. Over the following years, more encounters occurred. Merchant ships stumbled upon human colonies and were met not with submission, but with handshakes and questions. Scouts tried to intimidate them, but were answered with determination and stubborn pride. The humans were reckless, sometimes too bold for their own good, but every meeting showed the same truth. They did not fear the galaxy. They wanted to join it and perhaps one day lead it. This unsettled many who had grown used to ruling unchallenged. Whispers began spreading through the council chambers, quiet at first, but growing with each report. What if the prophecy is real? What if these humans are the ones it spoke of? Yet the leaders silenced these voices with threats and more laughter. Pride would not allow them to admit that a small backwater species could matter. For the humans, every encounter fueled their hunger. They built faster ships, armed their colonies, and studied every alien technology they could find. Curiosity drove them forward, but so did caution. They saw the power of the empires around them, and understood. They could not yet match it, but instead of retreating, they used their weakness as a weapon. They adapted. They improvised. They learned. Where other races grew slow with tradition, humans moved with reckless speed, breaking barriers and solving problems in ways no one expected. They were unpredictable, and that unpredictability was what made the galaxy uneasy. The prophecy had spoken clearly of such a trait. They will be the fire that cannot be contained, the steel that bends but never breaks. The first contact was not a war, not yet, but it was enough to light a flame that could never be extinguished. The humans now knew they were part of something greater, and they would not rest until they claimed their place among the stars. The Zorath Union watched them carefully, trying to decide if they should crush them before they grew too strong. Other empires debated quietly behind closed doors, wondering if action should be taken. But the council remained blinded by arrogance, their laughter still echoing across the chamber as they dismissed the humans again and again. What they did not understand was that the moment of first contact had already changed everything. Humanity had looked into the eyes of the galaxy, and instead of bowing, they had smiled. The prophecy had taken its next step forward, and no amount of laughter could erase it. The storm was coming, and the galaxy was too proud to see it. After the first contact, the galaxy expected humans to fade into silence, perhaps humbled by the sight of greater powers, but instead, they grew faster than anyone imagined, and their growth was quiet, like roots spreading under soil unseen until the ground cracked open. While the Stellar Council laughed in their shining chambers, humanity worked day and night building ships faster than their last, building colonies stronger than their first, and inventing weapons sharper than before. They did not boast of their progress to the galaxy. They did not send messages of challenge or threat. They only worked, and in that silence their strength multiplied. On Mars, great domes grew into full cities glowing under the red sky like stars. On the surface, on the moon, factories thundered, turning dust into machines that flew back to Earth and beyond. Even further human colonies began to sprout on moons around Jupiter and Saturn, fragile at first, but slowly hardened by the cold void. What humans lacked in tradition or old wisdom, they replaced with raw determination. They learned by failing, and each failure became the foundation for something stronger. No other race in galactic history had moved this quickly. Alien spies were everywhere, watching them with hidden eyes. Reports poured into the council chambers, filled with warnings and unease. The humans were building ships at a rate that defied logic. They were creating engines that stretched further into the dark. Their technology, though not yet equal to the Empire's, was evolving at a terrifying pace. Yet when these reports were delivered, the council sneered. "Let them grow," one elder said dismissively. "They are still weak compared to us. They are no more dangerous than sparks in the wind." The chamber filled with laughter once again, but beneath the surface of arrogance, cracks had begun to show. Some council members began whispering in secret meetings far from the public halls. They remembered the prophecy. They remembered the name humans etched across ancient ruins. And though they feared to speak it aloud in the open, they admitted quietly that perhaps the warnings had been true. Still, no one dared to act for fear of being mocked or dismissed. The galaxy remained blind while humanity sharpened itself in silence. On Earth, the spirit of humanity burned brighter than ever. The dream of the stars was no longer a fantasy, but a mission. Schools taught children about space as their future. Factories poured steel into rockets and stations. Governments argued, but in the end they all pushed forward, knowing that survival demanded growth. For humanity had realized something the Council had not. They understood that the galaxy was not empty, but filled with empires watching them, and that one day those empires might turn hostile. They knew they could not remain fragile, and so every ounce of effort went into preparing for what was coming. Their silence was not weakness. It was the quiet before a storm. The archivist, who still wandered the forgotten halls of prophecy, felt the tension rising with each passing year. He heard the laughter in the council chambers, but he also read the hidden reports, the ones kept from public view. He saw the numbers of ships built, the number of colonies rising, the speed of human progress. He trembled as he matched each report with lines of the prophecy. They will grow in silence. While others mock, they will build. While others laugh, they will sharpen their claws. His heart sank as he realized that this line had also come true. He tried once again to speak, but his warnings were drowned by arrogance. The council would not listen until it was too late. Meanwhile, human explorers pushed further into the void with each passing year. Small fleets of ships spread across their system, building outposts, mining asteroids, and carving stations into rock and ice. They learned to turn obstacles into allies. Where other races saw barren land, humans saw resources. Where others saw danger, humans saw opportunity. They harvested energy from stars, they pulled metals from asteroids, they built shelters in deadly cold and called them home. The galaxy thought them reckless, but in truth they were unstoppable. In silence, they prepared for what no one else believed possible. The Zorath Union watched them with growing unease. Their scouts returned again and again, whispering that humans were not slowing down. Some leaders argued they should strike now while humanity was still weaker than the great empires, but the council dismissed such thoughts as foolish. Why waste resources on shadows, they said. Let them play with their toys. And so no action was taken. Humanity was left alone to grow unchallenged. What the council did not understand was that every year they delayed, every year they mocked, was another year. Humanity turned fragile colonies into fortresses and fragile fleets into armadas. Among humans themselves, stories of the first contact spread into legends. The knowledge that they were not alone gave them purpose, but also urgency. They no longer looked at the night sky with only wonder, but with caution. They understood the galaxy could be both opportunity and threat. That understanding fueled their growth more than ambition alone. It was survival. Humanity had always thrived in survival. Through war and famine, through storms and darkness, they had endured. Now the stars themselves became the new challenge, and humanity embraced it without fear. Their silence was not ignorance, it was preparation. Years passed, and still the council laughed, but their laughter grew thinner, weaker, less certain. The first whispers of fear had begun to replace the sound of amusement. More reports arrived describing human war games on colonies. Humans testing weapons in space, humans building ships faster than before. And though the council dismissed these reports publicly, some members began to hide their worry behind smiles. They could not admit the truth. To admit it would be to admit they had been blind, but the prophecy did not wait for their pride. It was unfolding step by step, and nothing could stop it. In the quiet darkness of space, a new fleet of human ships, launched from Earth not the clumsy machines of the past, but sleek vessels of fire and steel, faster, tougher, and armed with weapons that no one had expected so soon. They did not announce themselves to the galaxy, they did not boast or demand respect. They only moved outward, spreading like a tide. The first wars had not yet begun, but the seeds were planted. Humanity's silent growth was almost complete. The prophecy's warning had reached its next line, and the galaxy was still laughing blind to the storm already on its doorstep. The first war began not with a declaration, but with arrogance, for the Zorath Union had grown tired of the whispers and shadows of human growth, and believed the time had come to remind these newcomers of their place in the galaxy, so they sent a fleet of warships, sleek and terrible vessels that had crushed many smaller civilizations before. With ease, their commanders, certain that humanity would collapse at the first strike. Yet they underestimated the fire hidden within human hearts. The Zorath fleet attacked a small human colony on the edge of Jupiter's moons, thinking it would be quick and brutal. They expected the humans to surrender within hours, but instead, the humans fought back not with superior ships or advanced weapons, but with desperate courage and clever tactics, turning mining vessels into weapons, turning the very rocks of the moons into shields and traps. The battle was chaos as humans improvised in ways the Zorath could not predict. Ships that were meant to haul ore rammed into enemy cruisers. Factories reprogrammed to build weapons, churned out crude missiles, and every colonist, no matter how young or old, played a part, whether in building defenses, carrying supplies, or fighting to the very end. The Zorath commanders laughed at first, thinking these actions desperate and foolish, but their laughter began to fade when their losses mounted. For every ship they destroyed, two more human vessels emerged from nowhere, small, quick, and determined, striking like swarms of insects and vanishing into asteroid fields where larger ships could not follow. The war was meant to be easy, but it became a nightmare. A war of attrition where the Zorath discovered that humans did not fight like any race they had encountered before. They did not surrender when outnumbered. They did not break when pressed. Instead, they adapted with each battle, learning faster than any enemy had the right to learn. A tactic that failed once would never fail again. Every weakness spotted was turned into strength, and in the silence of desperation, humanity became something terrifying. The Council watched from afar, expecting to see the human colony crushed quickly. But instead, they received reports of Zorath ships burning wreckage, drifting across space, and human survivors still holding the colony even after days of bombardment. The laughter in the council chamber grew weaker, now replaced by unease. Some whispered that the prophecy was unfolding once more, that the humans were not to be underestimated, but still the majority refused to act, calling it luck or chance, or the incompetence of the Zorath fleet. Yet in the shadows, fear grew, for the galaxy had never seen a young race fight like this. On the ground within the colony, the humans lived in constant fear, but also unshakable resolve. They knew they might die, but they also knew their survival mattered not just for themselves, but for all of humanity. If this colony fell, the message sent to the galaxy would be one of weakness, but if it survived, it would prove that humans were not prey, but predators. Every man, woman, and child carried that weight, and it fueled their resistance. The Zorath could not understand it, for they fought for conquest and glory while humans fought for survival, and when survival is at stake, no cost is too high. Weeks stretched into months as the Zorath tried again and again to break the colony, but each time they found humanity stronger than before. The humans scavenged enemy wrecks for parts, turning destroyed war machines into their own weapons. They used the environment to their advantage, setting traps among the moons, forcing the enemy into narrow passages where their larger ships became vulnerable. Slowly, the mighty Zorath fleet began to lose ships at a rate they had never expected, and their commanders grew desperate. What was meant to be a lesson became humiliation. What was meant to be swift victory became bleeding defeat. The galaxy watched with wide eyes, for the news of this war spread faster than the flames of battle. Other races who had laughed at humanity now whispered of their resilience. Some began to fear them, others began to respect them, but none could ignore them any longer. The prophecy, once considered a joke, now returned in hushed voices, for it had spoken of a war where humans would be underestimated and would rise stronger than their enemies believed possible. Each line of the prophecy seemed to come alive before. Their eyes and the laughter that once filled council chambers turned into silence, heavy and uncomfortable. At last, the Zorath withdrew, broken and humiliated, their fleet half destroyed, their pride shattered. They had not expected to lose to a young race of fragile beings tied to a single star, but they had, and the wound of that loss ran deep. Humanity had survived, and more than that, they had proven something terrifying to the galaxy. They could fight empires and win. The First War was not large by galactic standards, not compared to the great conflicts of old, but it was enough to change everything, for it marked the moment when humanity was no longer a shadow, no longer ignored, no longer mocked. They had entered the stage of the galaxy with fire in their hands and determination in their eyes. In the aftermath of the war, human leaders stood before their people proud but cautious, for they knew this was only the beginning. They had won one war, but there would be others greater and more terrible, yet they also knew they were ready to face them. The colony on Jupiter's moon became a symbol of hope, a reminder that humanity could survive even against impossible odds. And across Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies, celebrations broke out not just for survival, but for victory. They had fought an empire, and emerged alive. The archivist who had studied the prophecy sat alone in his chambers, trembling as he wrote his final notes. He knew what the next lines of the prophecy spoke of, and he feared them. The first war had come and gone, and it had proven the warnings true. Humanity had risen from fire and steel, and now the galaxy could no longer ignore them. The archivist whispered to himself words that echoed in the silent room. The prophecy has awakened. The storm has begun, and so the galaxy watched humanity standing at the edge of greatness and terror, their laughter silenced their pride, shaken their fear rising. The humans had tasted their first true war, and they had won. The storm of destiny was no longer distant. It was here, and the galaxy could feel its thunder. The galaxy had expected the humans to collapse after their desperate war against the Zorath Union. Yet instead of falling into ruin, they rose stronger than before, like fire feeding on oxygen. For every loss they rebuilt faster, for every scar they found new strength. The war had taught them lessons no academy or council could ever teach, and humanity learned them well. They studied every weakness, every failure, every mistake, and turned them into weapons. The wreckage of Zorath ships became blueprints. Their captured technology was stripped apart, piece by piece, until humans understood it better than the builders themselves. Factories on Earth, Mars, and the colonies worked day and night, not only to replace what was destroyed, but to improve it, to create fleets faster, tougher, and smarter than anything they had before. And in the silence of space, the human race began to grow into something unstoppable. Other races watched with unease, some curious, some terrified, for they had seen many young civilizations rise and fall, but never one like this. Most took centuries to recover from war, yet the humans seemed to thrive on it as if battle was part of. Their nature whispers spread through the stars, telling of human engineers who could turn scrap into weapons, human soldiers who refused to die even when outnumbered, human leaders who thought not in years but in generations, and everywhere. Those whispers spread. The prophecy returned like a ghost, once dismissed, now feared. The Galactic Council still tried to dismiss it, calling the Zorath War a small skirmish, but the smaller races who had always feared the Council's power began to look at humanity with new eyes, for they saw in the humans something they had longed for: a spark of defiance, a spirit that could stand against the great empires and win. Some even reached out in secret, sending envoys disguised as merchants, sharing minor trade agreements, offering supplies and information, for they believed that one day humanity would rise high enough to challenge the balance of the galaxy, and they wanted to be on the right side when it happened. Humanity accepted these deals carefully, never rushing, never showing too much, but behind their caution burned ambition, for they remembered the prophecy as well, and though many dismissed it as myth, there were leaders and scientists who believed it, and they shaped their plans with its words guiding them. The humans were not reckless. They knew they could not challenge the empires yet, not openly, but they also knew time was their greatest weapon. While others wasted centuries in politics and pride, humanity moved forward every year, bringing new discoveries, new inventions, and new dreams. The colonies spread wider, with ships pushing further into the unknown faster than any alien had expected. Asteroid belts became mining hubs, frozen moons became research stations, and every step carried the same message: humanity was not stopping. The galaxy whispered again of the first war, some calling it luck, others calling it destiny, but all agreed that something dangerous was growing on the edge of the stars, and no one could ignore it. On Earth, children grew up not only learning history, but also the story of survival of the colony that had fought the Zorath and won it, became legend, a tale told at every gathering, shaping the identity of a new generation who no longer feared the stars, but hungered for them. And when those children grew, they carried that hunger into the fleets, into the labs, into the council halls of humanity. It was more than survival. Now it was ambition, it was destiny, and it was unstoppable. The alien archives began to show new reports, each one more concerning than the last, human ships growing in number, human colonies spreading beyond known borders. Human scientists publishing discoveries that even the older civilizations struggled to match, and all of this in decades when most races required centuries. The old archivist who had first warned of the prophecy wrote trembling words into his records. He saw the pattern forming line by line, prophecy by prophecy, and he knew the truth. Humanity was not just rising. They were accelerating faster than any race before them, and the galaxy could do nothing to slow them down, for every obstacle made them stronger. Every enemy taught them something new, and every laugh only pushed them further. The council debated long and loud, some demanding action, some begging patience, but no decision could erase what was happening before their eyes. The rise of humanity had begun, and no empire, no council, no prophecy doubter could change that. Even the Zorath, who had once mocked and attacked them, watched in silence, licking their wounds and rebuilding in secret, for though they hated humans, they also feared them, and that fear spread like infection across their people. Whispers of the war, they had lost whispers of human courage, whispers of their own humiliation, and they swore vengeance. But deep inside, they wondered if vengeance was even possible against such a race. Meanwhile, humanity celebrated quietly, not with arrogance, but with certainty. They knew they had far to go. They knew greater wars waited ahead, but they also knew they had proven themselves, and that knowledge burned inside them like a star impossible to extinguish. The rise of humanity was not loud, not yet, but it was steady, like the march of time, and already the galaxy felt the shift. Empires who once laughed now whispered, merchants who once ignored now sought trade, soldiers who once dismissed now trained harder, and prophets who once mocked now stayed silent. And in the silence, one truth remained. Humanity had risen from war, from loss, from fire and steel, and they were not done. They were only beginning, and the galaxy, whether ready or not, would have to face the storm that was coming, for the prophecy no longer sounded like myth. It sounded like history unfolding before their very eyes, and the rise of humanity was its undeniable proof. The galaxy had always treated the prophecy as a myth, a forgotten tale told by old archivists to frighten the young. Yet now the signs were too many to ignore. Humanity's rise was no longer a question. It was a truth written in fire across the stars, and every world could feel the change in the air. Empires who had laughed at them now watched in silence. Allies who had doubted them now sought protection, and enemies who had once called them weak now trembled in secret, because the humans were no longer the small, desperate race crawling into the void. They had become something greater, something stronger, something that matched the very words of the prophecy. Itself, the council chambers echoed with debate, filled with fear and anger. But no decision they made could erase the fact that humanity had grown beyond control. Fleets of steel spread across the stars, armed with weapons designed from both their own genius and the salvaged technology of those who had once tried to destroy. Them colonies flourished on planets where no alien dared to live, and their influence spread like fire through dry grass, unstoppable and fierce. Still, the prophecy spoke of more, not just survival, not just strength, but of change. And that change began to show itself first in whispers, then in shouts. Humans did not only rise for themselves, they lifted others. Smaller races oppressed for centuries found themselves offered friendship and protection by humanity. Their ships once ignored were escorted safely by human patrols. Their trade once stolen was defended by human fleets. Their voices once silenced were heard in human councils. And for the first time in ages, the weak felt strong again. This was what terrified the great empires. The most for power was no longer balanced by ancient lines of rule. It was shifting, pulled like a tide by a force they could not control. The humans. On Earth, the leaders of humanity understood the weight of their actions. Some feared it, others embraced it. but all knew that they stood in the center of something far greater than politics or war. They stood at the heart of prophecy, and though many dismissed those ancient words, there were those who believed deeply, who shaped every decision, every alliance, every invention, with the prophecy's shadow guiding them, and every choice they made brought them closer to its fulfillment. The archivist who had first spoken of it, now old and frail, lived long enough to see what others had mocked become real. He wrote by dim light, his hands shaking, but his heart steady as he carved the final words into the records. They rise as fire, they march as steel, they come as change, and he knew it was no longer warning but reality. In distant sectors, alien spies watched human fleets move with precision. They listened to human speeches that spoke of freedom and unity. They studied human inventions that pushed the boundaries of science faster than they could follow, and all of them returned with the same fearful truth. Humanity was no longer a rising force. They were the force the prophecy had promised, and nothing in the galaxy could stand unchanged before them. Even the Zorath, who had sworn revenge, hesitated. Their leaders debated war, but their soldiers remembered defeat. Their people remembered humiliation, and their scientists whispered that fighting the humans again would not bring victory, only extinction. So they chose silence, rebuilding in shadows, while humanity grew louder, brighter, stronger. Other empires faced the same choice fight and risked destruction, or adapt and accept the new power among them, and though many tried to resist through schemes and plots, none of them could stop the steady tide of change, because the prophecy was not just about humanity's strength. It was about the galaxy's transformation under their rise, and that transformation had begun. In the quiet halls of Earth's greatest council, a human general spoke simple words to his people. We were warned of our weakness, now they are warned of our strength. And those words spread like fire across every colony, every fleet, every outpost, uniting them not under fear, but under purpose. And the galaxy felt that unity like a storm pressing against its borders. The prophecy had been fulfilled not in secret, not in shadow, but in open fire and steel, in voices of defiance, and in hands reaching out to those who had no hope. Humanity had become the storm the council had feared, and the protector the weak had prayed for, and there was no turning back, for the stars now belonged to them, and the galaxy would never again be what it was before. The prophecy had spoken of a time when humans would rise and change the galaxy forever, and now that time had arrived. The old empires that once ruled through fear and power found their authority slipping like sand through their fingers, while humanity stood firm, unshaken, and relentless. The fleets of Earth stretched across the stars, patrolling borders, protecting trade lanes, guiding colonies, and wherever they went, the old balance shifted. Worlds that once bowed to ancient thrones now turned their eyes toward humanity, not with fear, but with hope. Because the humans were different. They did not seek slaves. They did not demand blind loyalty. They offered protection, freedom, and a chance to stand as equals. And in a galaxy where equality had long been a dream, that promise became more powerful than any weapon the great empires still plotted, still whispered of war. But every year that passed, their fear grew, and their people began to ask questions. Why must we obey them when the humans offer more? Why must we bow when the humans walk beside us? And in those questions, the old order began to crumble. On Earth, leaders debated carefully. They knew the weight of their power. They knew the prophecy's shadow still followed them, and they feared what arrogance might bring. So they chose caution, patience, and vision, building alliances not through conquest, but through trust. Still, their fleets remained strong. Their armies prepared for war because they knew that peace was fragile and the empires would never surrender power without a fight. Yet even in preparation, humanity looked beyond war. They dreamed of something greater. They dreamed of a galaxy united not under one ruler, but under one vision. A vision where no race lived in fear, where no colony was abandoned, where no empire could silence the weak. And that vision spread like light breaking through the endless night. In the hidden archives, the last words of the old archivist were recorded. He died before seeing the full dawn. But his writings lived on, read by both humans and aliens alike. They rise to protect, they rise to unite, they rise to change. And for many, those words no longer felt like prophecy. They felt like truth, written into history itself. Smaller races who had suffered for centuries now stood beside humanity, building their own fleets, their own councils, their own defenses, supported by human technology and guidance. And for the first time, the galaxy saw something it had never seen. Before cooperation, not through force, but through choice, and the old empires trembled, because they knew this was the end of their rule. The Zorath, who had once sworn vengeance, broke their silence, and sent envoys not of war, but of peace. Their pride shattered, but their survival instinct stronger, they extended shaky hands toward humanity, and to the shock of the galaxy, humanity accepted. For they believed in future more than vengeance. And though many distrusted, the Zorath humanity offered them a chance to stand as allies, not enemies, because they understood that to truly fulfill the prophecy, they could not rise alone, they had to lift others with them. Across the stars, change became impossible to ignore, councils reformed, laws rewritten, and history reshaped by the actions of one race once mocked, once doubted, now standing at the center of everything. On a quiet night above Earth, the leaders gathered, watching the stars from a great observatory, and one of them spoke softly, "We are no longer the warned, we are the warning, we are no longer the prophecy, we are the future." And those words marked the true dawn of a new era. For the first time in countless ages, the galaxy did not fear the shadow of a single empire, but instead looked forward to the light of unity. And though challenges still lay ahead, though wars would still come, though betrayal and ambition would never vanish, the path had been set. Humanity had risen, and the galaxy would rise with them. The dawn of a new era had come. Not through fear, not through conquest, but through resilience, courage, and the unbreakable will of a species who refused to be forgotten. The stars themselves seemed brighter that night, as if the universe acknowledged the truth the prophecy was fulfilled, and the story of humanity was only just beginning.